Hello, D23.
Hello, D23 Expo. How we doing? So my name is C.B. Cebulski, and I'm the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics.
And I'm Tom Brevoort.
Tom and I are old school Marvel fans. I'm sure you guys are too. One of the things we're doing here at D23, we are looking for the biggest Marvel superfans. So during this panel, we might have a couple trick questions. And if there is someone who knows the answer, maybe, there will be a very special additional bonus gift for you if you know the answer to some of our questions. All right? So like we said, we're fans, you're fans, this is a panel for the fans. We really don't consider this a panel. This for us is just a fireside chat. We're all just sitting around talking about Marvel, talking about our 8 decades, the characters, the comics that we love so, so dearly. So, shall we get this kicked off?
Yep, let's do it.
Oh, one other thing. This panel is being live streamed around the world. So let's give a big hello to our international Marvel Universe audience. Hello!
Hello! Hola!
Wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of it. And thank you for making yours Marvel wherever you are. So, all right, why don't we start?
Sit down.
All right.
Take a seat. Oh, that's comfy.
Yep. So this isn't a bonus question or a trick question, but who knew the name of what the company for Marvel Comics was before we were called Marvel Comics? So Timely Comics.
Yeah, Marvel Comics started in 1939, 80 years ago, as Timely Comics. The publisher was Martin Goodman. He had before that run a line of pulp magazines, which were fiction magazines that were all prose, and that were sort of the precursor to comic books. And comic books started taking off in the late 30s. And Martin thought it'd be a good idea to get in on this new medium. And so he did so by launching Marvel Comics #1, which came out on August 31st, 1939.
So it's listed there on the cover of the comic. Everyone could see there were, in comic book form, there were 5 characters who were introduced in this comic. Correct, Tom?
Yes. And you want me to list them?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead. I can read them there too.
Okay. Well, no, we'll do this. We'll do this together. We'll work together as a team.
Yep.
We'll do this. Yes, there were 5 characters, original characters introduced in Marvel Comics #1. The cover character, the original Human Torch, the Submariner, the Angel, Kazar, the Savage, and the Masked Raider, who was a Western Lone Ranger kind of character.
And for the most part, most of those characters, it was a different angel, obviously,
Right.
have existed in some way, shape, or form throughout Marvel Comics history in our tapestry of continuity for the last 80 years.
Yes, yeah. All those characters, while they've changed, while in certain cases, like the Human Torch, different people sort of inhabited those roles in later years, most everything that was introduced in Marvel Comics #1 is still somewhat relevant to the publishing world 80 years later. And in fact, Martin did this as a test case. He printed 80,000 copies with an October cover date and sent them out. He got the printing back, and it was a new printer. And the printer on the first printings did a terrible job. They were badly printed. They looked awful. And Martin thought, man, I'm going to lose my shirt on this. We're not doing this anymore. But he sent the 80,000 copies out, and they sold out instantly. And he went back and reprinted it the next month, which is the copies that you'll sometimes see with the October whited out and a November date over it. He printed 800,000. And those two sold really well. So all of a sudden, Timely Comics, Marvel Comics was an ongoing enterprise, was a thing that they were going to do.
And I remember recently, we were at an exhibition for Marvel Comics history, and they had an actual copy of Marvel Comics #1. And you mentioned, I think, was it there were less than 100 known copies in existence?
It's something like that. There are only about 100 of those, at least that are known to still exist in the world, because it's 80 years, and there were paper drives, and a lot of moms threw young people's comics away, and that's why they're valuable today.
Great. So let's start with our first question, see if anybody know the answer to this. So Marvel has a history of our characters teaming up, of going into each other's books, of crossing over. It's this big interconnected universe in comics, in the games, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But who knows the comic that featured the first Marvel team-up? Can anybody name that comic? No, Secret Wars comes later. We're going to be talking about that. Good guess, though. A little bit before Secret Wars. Spider-Verse, nope. Vader's, no, Vader's is close. It's a good guess. Nope, nope, nope. Marvel Team-Up's a good guess, too. All right. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone would really get this.
Yeah.
Marvel Mystery Comics number 9.
Yeah, Marvel Mystery Comics number 9. They'd only done 9 issues of this comic, and this had an idea that seems like an obvious idea to us today because we've been doing it so long. But up till Marvel Mystery Comics number 9, you never got characters from 2 separate series interacting. The original Human Torch was a fire guy, obviously. The original Submariner was a water-based hero and was kind of more of an anti-hero. He came from Atlantis. His people had been wronged by the surface world, and he kind of came to Manhattan on a rampage. And so as a big story stunt, Carl Burgos, who drew the Human Torch, and Bill Everett, who originated the Submariner, took the 2 characters and put them at odds with one another for 22 pages. And this was a huge sensation. And it's also the first inklings of what we now know as the Marvel Universe. The real, one of the fundamental ideas of the Marvel Universe is that all of the crazy, ridiculous, superhuman characters we have, heroes and villains, all exist in the same world, in the same space. And at any given point, they can encounter one another and battle one another or have relationships with one another. And that all started here. And this was the first time anybody, not just in comics, but anywhere, had done this. It's a crazy thing to think about, but before this, you wouldn't have seen, Aliens versus Predator. Nobody had done it.
So were there more than 100 copies of this comic in existence?
There probably are, but not too many more than that. Maybe
right.
200?
Wow. So, Captain America.
Captain America number 1. Captain America was, in the 1940s, Timely's big character, big comic. The character was created by Joe Simon and the great Jack Kirby, which is a name you'll hear an awful lot over the course of the next hour. This first issue of Captain America was released in December of 1940, and that's noteworthy because at the time it was released, the United States was not yet involved in what would be known as World War II. So this cover of Cap socking Hitler in the jaw, this was a pretty provocative image in December of 1940. This is the equivalent of Captain America today punching the head of state of another nation, and so it was very clear where Timely Comics came down in terms of the world situation, and where Captain America sat in terms of what was going on in the world, even though America was not a part of the war effort just yet.
And then America eventually entered the war. Cap became kind of a character that the troops could rally around. He was quite symbolic, to the U.S. Armed Forces around the world throughout the conflict.
Yep, and to the rest of the comic book world. Like in 1942, every comic book publisher, large or small, had a Star-Spangled character that was basically Captain America in a different outfit. They had a lot of Major Liberties and Colonel Stars and Stripes, and most of whom are not remembered anymore because really the secret of Captain America was Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Kirby in particular had a way of illustrating action in a real in-your-face manner. He would design these pages where the figures would just be coming out of the page and be exaggerated in this crazy way that nobody else could quite match. So particularly in a world in which you didn't have television yet and your movies were black and white and so forth, there was nothing that had quite the same kind of impact as an issue of Captain America.
And then after the war, Captain America kind of faded in popularity.
All the superheroes.
The superhero genre kind of faded, but Timely kept on publishing. But there were not many superhero comics.
Yeah, throughout the end of the 40s into the 50s and 60s, as superheroes waned, Marvel, which was then largely known as Atlas Comics, developed all sorts of other genres. You see here there were humor comics and sort of science fiction monster comics and Western comics, war comics. And a number of these characters, surprisingly, have gone on to have a life much like the characters from Marvel Comics #1. Certainly everybody here, I'm sure, knows who Groot is.
I am Groot. We've also got Patsy Walker there, who was in the Jessica Jones series. Venus is in Agents of Atlas. So a lot of these characters, even though they weren't superhero comics, remained popular or were brought back to be a part of the continuing Marvel Universe to this day.
Yeah, it's one of the beautiful things about the Marvel Universe is that we use the whole buffalo, and that even a thing that we come out with and we try and it doesn't quite click at that moment. There may be another moment years later where that idea, with a little twist or a little reimagining, becomes a huge success. And we'll get to some more of that as we go.
So, the men that made the comics, the reason that a lot of us are here today. Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and John Romita Sr., the pillars of what became to be known as the Marvel Age, the superhero age.
Yeah. These guys, and they were more beyond, but these are sort of four of the bigger names that loom large in our world. In the 1960s, revolutionized the way comic book stories and superhero stories were told. And what they did, again, from a perspective of 2019, seems like a super easy idea. Like, of course you would do it. Why wouldn't you do that? But it really has to be stated that it was completely revolutionary in 1961, 1962, when they were coming up with these characters. And what they did was very simple. Most superhero stories up to this point had basically been about the superheroes as costume figures, solving complicated mysteries and contending with villains and doing all of that stuff. But there wasn't a lot of depth to any of the characters. They were so interchangeable that, it used to be said that if you put all of the Justice League in an airplane and had the balloons with tails going to the airplane, not only couldn't you tell who was talking, it really didn't matter who was talking. And what Stan and Jack and Steve and later John did was make the comics about the people inside the costumes and about their problems and struggles, and give them feet of clay, give them problems that were similar to the problems that the audience had and that they could relate to, and bring a certain amount of self-knowing humor to the characters as well. They would be self-effacing. They wouldn't always like one another. They'd get in each other's face. They'd get on each other's nerves, like CB and me. They wouldn't get along. And they were just a lot more colorful and vibrant, because really what you were reading about wasn't Spider-Man. What you were reading about was Peter Parker, and every once in a while Peter Parker would pull on tights and go fight the Vulture. But you were just as invested in whatever was going on in terms of his relationship with his Aunt May, or the girl he liked at school, or the bully that was giving him a hard time, or having to make the rent and sell photographs to Jonah Jameson. And that soap opera element, again, it seems so obvious now, but it changed everything, and it led to kind of the Marvel revolution of comics.
And those are tenets that we still abide by to this day when we make the comics or the games or the animation, or when Kevin Feige is producing the films. It's really, the names on the books and on the big screen when you go there is Spider-Man and Captain America and the Hulk. But at their core, the real reason that these resonate with us is we're telling those stories about Peter Parker and about Steve Rogers and about Bruce Banner. And it's that humanity that really, grounds us as fans with the characters that we know and love. Now, as we get on to some more of the history,
right? So the
Fantastic Four.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The first, what we think of as the Marvel Comics, was Fantastic Four #1. And Fantastic Four #1 was a response to DC having a very good selling book. DC was the big mainstay company in the early 60s, and they had a hugely successful title called Justice League of America, which was basically all of their superheroes together as a team. You may have seen stuff on them. And Martin Goodman, who at this point was kind of a trend chaser, you can tell from the years when he was doing mostly genre comics. Whenever, if war movies seemed to be in, he'd do a lot of war comics, and if science fiction movies were in, he'd do a lot of science fiction comics. So, and the story has it that at this time, Stan had been working in comics for about 20 years. He was the editor at Timely. He had been since around 1942. And he was sort of churning through these sort of formulaic stories, and he was in his 40s. He just turned 40, 41, 42, and the business didn't seem like it was going anywhere, like it was a dying industry, and he wanted to get out, and he was trying to get a newspaper strip going or some other writing work, and had not quite found another avenue to move into. And supposedly he was at home one night, bemoaning, his lot in life to his wife, Joan. And Joni said to him, well, look, Stan, why don't you just, do a book the way you want to do it? Because the worst thing that'll happen is it won't sell or Martin will fire you. And if he fires you, you want to quit anyway, what the heck? Give it a shot. And so emboldened by this, Stan and Jack Kirby launched Fantastic Four. And rather than either bringing back the characters that they had from the 40s and so forth and doing the same old thing, they tried to approach this in the manner we talked about earlier, starting with the characters being interesting human beings first and superheroes second. In fact, in this first issue of Fantastic Four, they don't even wear costumes. They're just in normal street clothes, as you can kind of see here. Their foibles, the fact that they didn't get along, the fact that there was some tragedy baked into them, and that the thing had become a superhuman creature, but one for whom his power was a curse. He couldn't live a normal life. These were all things that were suddenly very exciting to people, and the fact that the stories began to start to connect issue by issue.
And this is such an iconic cover that most of us know, for most of our lives as Marvel fans. And when we're planning our 80th anniversary, we were talking about telling stories that hadn't been told before. And when you leave and you get Marvel Comics 1000 today, you're going to read it and see there's a great tale in there about some of the backdrop of the Marvel Universe. But the one story we talked about has ever been told, and I think you think has it, is if the Fantastic Four here is fighting a big green monster, who tied up Reed Richards? And we talked about maybe we should tell that story, but we never got around to it.
No, we haven't. We haven't figured it out yet.
And then Fantastic Four came out, was a hit.
Yep.
Stan and Jack had a hit on their hands. So Martin said, make more, correct?
Yes. Spider-Man came about in 1962. His birth was a little bit difficult. There's a whole bunch of different stories about how Spider-Man came to be. But, what we can sort of settle on for certain is this. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created the version of Spider-Man that we know from Amazing Fantasy number 15. Peter Parker, he's a young kid, kind of on the bookish, nerdy side, not very popular in school, goes to a demonstration, science demonstration, where a spider is irradiated, gets bitten by the spider, gains the powers of the spider, decides this is it, this is my ticket to fame and fortune, goes out to seek his way in the world as a performer, has a moment where all of this celebrity goes to his head, and rather than doing the right thing and stopping a burglar who is fleeing the scene, he lets the guy go because he's kind of full of himself. That burglar goes on to kill his Uncle Ben, and he learns that with the great power that he's been given, there must also come great responsibility. Spider-Man debuted in Amazing Fantasy 15. He was intended to be the regular feature in Amazing Fantasy, but they canceled the book. And they canceled the book based on the sales of the previous 14 issues. And then 6 months later, they got sales figures in on Amazing Fantasy 15, and the sales took a huge jump up, and Martin went, hey, why don't you bring back that Spider-Man character, and let's give him a book. And the rest is kind of history. He's become the flagship of the whole Marvel line.
So it was Fantastic Four, then Spider-Man, and then the line just continued to grow from there. And there are so many stories that we could tell about all the different books, but we are limited in time. But, you know, the Hulk, Bruce Banner, the Green Goliath was not green originally.
Yes, the Hulk was not, yes, he was gray.
They really want comics.
They really want the comics. We love that. Yeah, when the Hulk was created in his first issue, he was colored gray. And by the second issue, people had had a change of heart and a change of thinking. And from that point forward, he was depicted as green. But that was not the case originally.
Yep. What was that? Frenzy?
He's saying it was a printing error.
Yes.
It wasn't actually a printing error, but that's a longer story than I have time to go into here. They made a choice, and it was not the best choice. So they made another choice, and green turned out to be a better choice.
Next year we can come back and do the Urban Legends of Marvel panel.
All right.
So Stan and Jack and Steve and John and Wally and Joe and all the guys who came in started building what we know as the Marvel Universe. And one of the terms that Stan coined for that was that Marvel was the world outside your window. You want to explain a little bit about it, or?
You're good.
Yeah, because Marvel Comics is the real world. Unlike a lot of other comic book companies at that time that created these fictional worlds with these, superheroes that really weren't all that relatable, Stan really wanted to make sure that not only were the characters themselves relatable through their heart and their humanity and their humor, but also that these surroundings, that the places that these characters lived were real places, and that the events that happened in the books were a reflection of those periods of time. So Marvel Comics, to this day, are really on the cutting edge of reflecting what's going on in the world. They're still escapism, but they're relatable in that way as well. And so as Stan sat in his office in New York and wrote these stories, and the artists were in their offices and cubicles drawing them, they always kept in mind that if they wanted to look like you could look out your window no matter where you were in the world, and you could see Spider-Man swinging by, or you could see Iron Man flying overhead, or you could see this thunder god from Asgard kind of battling a dragon over the Atlantic Ocean. So
yeah, it's one of the common stories that a lot of Marvel fans and people that have gone on to be creators talk about. The first time they come to Manhattan, to New York City, and come to the Marvel offices, they walk down the street and they kind of look up and look around, kind of hoping to catch a glimpse of Spider-Man swinging around in between the buildings. And this was really Stan just writing what he knew. Most other comic book superheroes lived in places like Metropolis or Gotham City, these made-up fictional cities, and Stan figured it was just easier to write about the place he knew. He lived in Manhattan, so most of the superheroes lived in and around New York City, and that somehow gave everything a greater sense of realism to it.
Now, when these guys were creating comics, they were using something mostly called the Marvel method, which was Stan was writing, probably just peak, how many comics? 10 to 12 comics a month?
Yeah, something like that.
So Stan would write out quick plots, either a couple paragraphs on a page, or sometimes, as the legend tells it, he would just verbally dictate stories to Jack Kirby or John Romita, and they would go away and they would draw the 20, 22, 24-page stories, and they would come back with the art, and after that, Stan would go in and actually dialogue it based on some of their suggestions.
Yeah, so in point of fact, it was a much more collaborative system than anybody else was using, and the artists were really co-creators on all of these series. That a lot of the page-to-page plotting that was going on in the Marvel books was due to Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and John Romita and the other folks that were involved here. But what that also meant was the Marvel comics were a lot more visual. They were a lot more exciting because the artists would draw stuff they wanted to draw and make those pages and make those scenes just more electrifying and more visual than other comics that were very rigidly set to panel 1, this happens, and this is the caption, and this is the balloon, and so forth. It was a sort of weird, cockeyed way of going about making the books, but it really worked out for the better for those creators.
Yep. And another big part of The World Outside Your Window was Stan wanted all the Marvel characters, be they, heroes, villains, background characters, love interests, to reflect the world outside your window. So he wanted anybody to be able to pick up a comic and find a character they can relate to. So Stan was one of the creators, along with the co-creators on the books. We're big on introducing diversity into the books and the characters, which is going to bring us to one of our secret questions. So I'm sure some people have seen this online. That is the original Jack Kirby design for the Black Panther, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That is correct.
Now, for a free comic, if anyone can get it, before he was called the Black Panther, before they changed his name to the Black Panther, he was called something else. Somebody got it over here.
Yep.
Yeah, right over there. I heard her say it first. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Cold Tiger. Exactly.
Yes, it's on the screen.
It's on the screen, but she read it first.
We made it easy.
So the Black Panther, as we know him, Prince T'Challa, was originally the Cold Tiger who looked like that, but he was changed to the design that we know and love in the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, this was in 1966. Having a black superhero in 1966 was a fairly revolutionary thing. Again, it's kind of impossible to really think about that these days, but it was true. And in fact, there was such concern about the introduction of this and what this might do to the sales of this issue of Fantastic Four, in southern states or whatnot, that this is the whole reason that the Panther's costume was changed and he got the full cat face mask, is so that on that first appearance cover, he looks cool, but you can't tell what his ethnicity is. Again, it worked out. He looks great. It was a great moment, but there's a little underbelly to it that's not as wonderful.
Yep. And along that time, along the same theme of The World Outside Your Window, there were Marvel Comics reflected some of the problems that were going on, in American society at that point. Who remembers this? Anyone? The growing drug problem in America back then. Yeah.
It was
Go ahead.
It was the 60s. This issue is actually noteworthy because if you look at that Spider-Man cover on the left, in the upper right corner, there is no Comics Code Authority seal. The Comics Code Authority used to be the sort of self-censorship body that the comics had in order to keep everything clean and above board. This issue of Spider-Man and the two that came after it were published without the code. And the reason they were published without the code was the division of the U.S. government came to Stan and asked him to do an anti-drug story in one of the Marvel comics. They knew that Marvel had a growing college readership and that they really paid attention to what was going on there, and they thought it would be a good way to get the message out about the dangers of drug use. Stan didn't know a whole lot about the contemporary drug culture, but he did a very nice story. There's a few panels from it there. Unfortunately, the Comics Code stipulated that any mention of drugs was forbidden, and they rejected the story. And Stan went to them along with Martin Goodman and said, but the government asked us to do this. And the code said, nope, it's against the code, we won't. And they went ahead and published it anyway, which was a fairly brave thing to do because they didn't know if they'd get distribution, if they were going to have any kind of blowback on this. And as it turned out, again, they got a lot of good publicity and write-ups. And after this, the code was revised to sort of bring it up to date in the late 60s and early 70s, and to make stuff like doing a drug story that was an anti-drug story, making that allowable under the rules of the code.
And we stopped using the comic code when? Early 2000s or late 1990s?
It's the early 2000s, around 2001.
Yep.
So there is no comics code now. They're gone.
So anybody remember this stuff? So we always like to say that Marvel and a lot of what Stan was doing was the precursor to modern social media. And you might laugh when I say that, but I think we truly do believe that, because Stan was one of the first people to go in there and really pull back the curtain and have a direct dialogue with fans in so many different ways. And here you see some of the examples from, the Mighty Marvel Marching Society to the Friends of Old Mary Marvel, FOOM, Stan's Soapbox, the Bullpen Bits, and even the Marvel No Prize. And also, I think Marvel was one of the first modern fan clubs as well, correct?
Well, they certainly had a fan club. One of the things that Stan was very good at in his text pages, on his letters pages, in such, is, as CB says, talking directly to the audience and making all of the people who are working on the comics, including himself, as characters almost as broadly drawn and vibrant as the superheroes that you were reading about. That he would give everybody personalities. He wouldn't just be Stan Lee, he'd be Smiling Stan, and Jack Kirby would be Jolly Jack Kirby, even on the days when he wasn't so jolly. And he would talk about the things that were going on, and he'd provide a real dialogue back and forth with the audience that just created more of a sense of you being a part of the club, you being an insider and a real part of Marvel in a way that other comic book publishers of the time just didn't understand and didn't do. Again, as CB says, it's the same kind of thing that you see today everywhere on social media, but Stan was doing it with the technology of the 1960s. So there's a lot of buttons and bumper stickers and weird fan club paraphernalia. And
there was a record, right?
Yeah, there was like a flexi disc record where Stan got all the people to go out to a recording studio and joke around for 20 minutes. And this stuff really made, again, Marvel feel like, your circle of friends, like your buddies who are all hanging out and swapping stories and having a good time.
And up there in the top, I believe your right-hand corner, you'll see what's called the Marvel No Prize. And for those who don't know what the Marvel No Prize was, that was the thing that Stan did as continuity started growing, because they were writing all these comics and creating these new characters and having this interconnected universe. And sometimes mistakes would get made. Something would be colored wrong, or they would reference an adventure that's the first adventure, but they'd met the character before. And the No Prize was created. So what it was if you recognized a problem in Marvel Comics, or there was a glitch or an error in the continuity, you could write Stan a letter, tell him what the mistake was, and come up with a solution, how you would fix it. And if you did that and he liked it, he would send you that envelope empty. And it was the Marvel No Prize.
Yeah, that envelope actually was an outgrowth of things. Like first, Stan had said he was, we're not going to give out any prizes, for this sort of thing. There are no prizes. He started using it as a term, so people would send in their mistakes and solutions, and he'd say, right, you get a no prize, and people would write to him and go, I've been waiting, and my no prize hasn't shown up. Where is my no prize? And Stan was clever enough to go out and print these empty envelopes that said, your no prize is inside, and they would seal them, and they would send them out, and it would show up. And then after that, he would start getting mail that said, I think my no prize fell out in the mail. There was nothing in the envelope.
And now people just go on Twitter and call us useless idiots.
We've cut out the middleman. It's a lot easier now.
And then one of Stan's other great ways to interact with the fan was, of course, the Fantastic Four fan page, the letters page that they would run in the back of every issue of comics. A lot of people that we know and love have been published a lot in these comics. I myself have had a letter published in the comic. I remember when it was first done. I was at the comic shop. I opened it up, and there's my name in the comic book. And I said, oh, my God, look, I'm a published writer. And my mom was so impressed, she bought every copy. Good for sales. Yep. Did you ever have a letter published?
Not in a Marvel book.
Not in a Marvel book? Uh-oh.
I had a letter printed in Jack Kirby's Captain Victory, #2.
Oh, wow.
For Pacific Comics.
Oh, fantastic.
Never in a Marvel book.
Never?
It's my secret shame.
Send one in. I'll see if I can get it in
Okay,
for you.
I'll write it tonight.
Any Game of Thrones fans out there? George R.R. Martin, his actual first published work was in a Marvel comic as a fan. And you were telling me earlier that George R.R. Martin was also the first person in line who bought the first ticket to the first ever comic convention.
Yeah, in 1965 in New York.
Yep.
He was attendee number 1
At New York Comic Con.
at the first New York Comic Con.
So it's always fun, too, when you go back and you read your old comics, look through the letters pages, because there are a lot of famous people who are writing now in comics or film or television or movies who have written letters to Marvel in the past.
And they all are embarrassed if you bring it up to them.
Yes.
So it's a great thing to have in your back pocket.
Hence, I didn't mention the issue that my my letter was written in.
You mean G.I. Joe number
19.
I was going to let you off, but all right.
We'll get to G.I. Joe later.
Okay.
So, everybody know all these characters, right? The X-Men, the Incredible Hulk, Thor and Tales to Astonish. Ant-Man. Huge successes, right? Went on, started strong, kept on going? No. Canceled.
Yeah, well, again, as I was saying earlier, one of the kind of great things about Marvel is that even the failures get to be successes if you wait long enough. And all 3 of these characters that have now gone on to be enormously popular and enormously well-known were all, when they first started, failures. X-Men, launched in 1963, ran for 66 issues, and was canceled. It just wasn't the time for it. While it had a good idea in it, they just didn't express it right or whatever. Incredible Hulk lasted for 6 issues. There were only 6 issues of the Hulk canceled, done. And it was only the Avengers that brought him back into the fold, and then he became a huge character as a result of that. And Ant-Man was a character that, boy, they tried really hard with for about 5 or 6 years. And every few issues, they'd adjust the formula a little bit. They introduced the Wasp, hoping that maybe Ant-Man and the Wasp together will be a thing, and that wasn't working. And they decided, well, what if we flip him, and we'll make him a big guy, we'll make him Giant Man, and we'll change his costume, and none of that worked. Canceled, went away. If you talked to anybody in like 1966 and said, there are going to be 2 enormous movies, they would have had you committed, and I'd have been right there with them. It's amazing.
But as Tom said, sometimes you have to fall down before you can get back up. Failures sometimes become the greatest of successes, as was the case with the X-Men.
Yeah, the all-new X-Men, who are the much more well-known these days and recognizable X-Men, were launched in 1975. X-Men had been gone for about half a decade at that point. And the way this version of X-Men came about was Marvel's president at the time was a guy named Al Landau, and Al Landau had gotten into the business by selling agenting the rights to reprint Marvel Comics overseas in different territories. That's where he had made his money. So when he came in as Marvel's president, he suggested we should do a comic that has characters from all of these other countries in it, and I bet we could sell a lot of copies in all of those places. And so they decided to bring the X-Men back and to make them an international team. But unfortunately, the communication was a little bad because the specific characters and the specific nations that they came from weren't, in almost any case, the places where we were selling our comics overseas. So, but, X-Men was a huge phenomenon. Len Wein and Dave Cockrum did Giant Size X-Men 1. Len was very quickly succeeded by Chris Claremont, who went on to write X-Men for 17 years and really set the template for those characters. Dave was followed up by a number of great illustrators, John Byrne and Paul Smith and John Romita Jr. And X-Men was the most popular franchise in comics for about 25, 30 years.
Yep. And I've been an X-Men reader my whole life, and I thought I knew most of the stuff and most of the stories about the X-Men. But speaking of those urban legends, you told me the story that I've asked maybe you could retell it here about Wolverine's arms and Colossus's pants.
Oh yeah, two little weird X-Men facts. And one of these actually had to do with the comics code. When it came to Wolverine, for some reason, and I don't understand it myself, they would not allow Wolverine to have arm hair when he was in costume. So as you see here on the right, he's clean shaven. On the left, you take his shirt off, he's got hair everywhere. But he puts the shirt on, clean.
Mutant healing factor.
Mutant healing factor.
Mutant growing factor.
Sort of the same kind of thing, but this was not a comics code thing. This was just, what a weird sort of way of thinking about stuff. Colossus, when he would go from his human form to his armored form, he would lose his pants leggings. That they would be blue leggings, and then he would armor up, and suddenly you would see the metal there. Somehow those bits of the pants would fall down or suck back into the shorts or something in some weird way.
So next time you're at your comic shop or on a date or at a dinner party, you got some great trivia to bring up after a couple drinks. Now, moving on, other kind of controversial things that are happening in comics at the time, kind of other firsts. The death of Gwen Stacy, which was one that was quite controversial because it was not the first time a character died in comics, but the first time a major character really passed away, and there was a huge fan outcry about this.
Yeah, this was a big deal. Nowadays people know Gwen best from her appearances in the various Spider-Man films. But Gwen had been Peter Parker's longtime girlfriend in Spider-Man, since the very early '60s, and the fact that she, was killed off in this fashion was shocking to people. During this time, Stan was the publisher of Marvel, and he would go on personal appearances, speak at colleges, much like this, but a lot better. And he would talk to people about it, and this book came out, and everywhere he went, fans were upset, and they would throw things at him and go, "Why did you do this? Why did you kill Gwen Stacy?" And he came back to the offices afterwards and went to writer Jerry Conway and said, "Jerry, you got to do something. You got to bring her back. Help me out here, pal." And this was the origin of the Spider-Man clone saga. That the way Jerry got around this was he introduced Gwen Stacy's clone, and then there was the Spider-Man clone, and that became a whole snowball that kind of grew out of control as a result. But it was as shocking a story from a story point of view as had ever been done in comics before.
In the continuing stride to make Marvel feel like the world outside your window, Stan kept introducing more characters. One of those great characters was Luke Cage, the hero for hire. I know Mike Coulter did such an amazing job playing Luke in the Netflix series. The other thing, though, the interesting thing about being kind of representing the world outside your window is fashion. Fashion never quite ages well. Nor do costumes. So when you go back and you look at a lot of these costumes, they're classic costumes. And old school Marvel fans, we love them. But people knew coming into these comics, look at these and go, "Oh my God, these comics look so dated."
It's very much like looking at photos of what you were wearing 20 years ago.
Yep. So as you can see, here's Luke Cage's original costume. And so many people still love the costume, especially the tiara, which they did a great homage for in the first episode of the Luke Cage show. So, are we going to talk about the secret origin of Secret Wars? I mean, this is a comic that I still remember buying the first issue of. It is a comic, was really the first event comic that Marvel or any publisher actually produced. And it is still a comic and a series that has repercussions to Marvel, to our publishing line, to this day.
Yes.
Where did it come from? Was it originally conceived as a comic book, Tom Brevoort?
It was not originally conceived as a comic book per se. We had cut a deal to do a line of Marvel superheroes toys, and the toy company was wanting a comic book to tie in to their toy launch that would promote the thing that they were doing. And Jim Shooter and Mike Zeck took that on and did Secret Wars. And Secret Wars became a huge game changer in the world of comics. It was the first comic book series that took all the characters and put them in one big, massive, crazy story. But it all came back originally from a desire to sell and promote this line of toys.
And it's interesting because while it did start as a toy line, it went on to become one of the most iconic comic book series. And it reflects one of the sayings that Stan used to have is great characters and great creators equals great comics. So it might not care where the idea comes from, if it's to sell toys or to create a TV show, but the right creators coming onto a book with the right, with the passion for it to tell the right story can really create a fantastic Marvel comic with what they have.
Yep. And one of the big things that came out of Marvel Secret Wars was this change to Spider-Man's costume. That the idea behind Secret Wars is all the heroes would go off onto this adventure on this far-off battle world, and they'd all come back somewhat different. And the biggest change was that Spider-Man was going to have this black costume. And this idea was debuted, and Jim Shooter came up with it and thought, this is great. Everybody will love this. We'll have a new Spider-Man. And all of the licensing partners went, what are you doing? You're changing Spider-Man. Spider-Man's our best seller. We sell so much Spider-Man stuff. You can't do this, Jim. So they ended up only intending to keep the costume for the duration of Secret Wars. That in Spider-Man, at the end of Secret Wars, Spider-Man decides, he realizes that the costume is alive and it's an alien symbiote that's bonding to him, and he throws it away and puts his old suit back on. But as soon as the book started coming out, they were enormously popular. And as soon as the licensors found out about it, they suddenly were getting requests from all of their accounts going, we want the new Spider-Man too. And they were like, we have 2 Spider-Men we can sell now. That's twice as good. You got to do more of this, Jim. And so the black costume ended up sticking around and being a regular thing and leading to its evolution into Venom. The big Spider-Man villain of the late 90s, late 80s, and all through the 90s and 2000s.
Exactly. And, a lot of people don't know, speaking of toys, that Marvel originally back in the day, especially in the early 80s, told a lot of stories with licensed properties. And not just did we create comics for these toy companies like Hasbro and G.I. Joe, but a lot of the storylines for those 2 properties particularly were developed by Marvel. You might have seen this on on the Netflix, The Toys That Made Us.
Yeah.
They've gone really into detail on this, but there were comic book creators that were hired through Marvel to create these kind of histories that went on to popularize the toy lines.
Yeah. Before Star Wars came out, George Lucas and the folks behind Star Wars were worried that it wasn't maybe gonna hit, which is a crazy thing to think about today too. And one of the things that they wanted was they wanted there to be a Marvel Comics adaptation that came out before the film to kind of prime the pump and get people excited and understanding what their movie was about. And so, there was a deal cut, and Marvel started doing Star Wars comics, and the first 2 or 3 issues came out before the film even opened. And these turned out to be the most successful comics Marvel ever published in the 70s. They went through multiple printings. They were reissued as treasury editions and digests and paperback books, and literally Star Wars as a comic saved Marvel at a time when not a lot of comics were selling very well. The sales of just those Star Wars movie comics brought in enough money to keep Marvel going.
Yeah, and recently, it was about 5 years ago, Star Wars came back to Marvel, which was great. And then last year, Conan, which was a comic that we published for years back in the 70s, was relaunched at Marvel with Jason Aaron, Mahmoud Asrar, and Matt Wilson. Has been doing phenomenally for us, and it's led to a number of different series. So, Marvel in the 90s is where we saw some phenomenal growth. So many of the creators today who came onto books and really made an impact with their styles and coming onto characters, changing the storylines and creating new characters. For example, you want to tell the story about how kind of the progression of some of this stuff went, Tom?
Yeah. This is Spider-Man #1, which at the time was the best-selling Marvel comic ever done. It was written and drawn by Todd McFarlane, who many people know and love today from from Spawn and from his toy lines and all the other stuff he's done. He was a hugely successful creator on Spider-Man, and so at a certain point they gave him his own Spider-Man book to write and draw, and he did issue 1. They released it. We sold 2.5 million copies. The editor-in-chief at that time was a man named Tom DeFalco, and at the end of the year, Tom went to the bosses at Marvel to get his publishing plan, marching orders for the next year, and they said, "You did great, Tom. Now do it again, but more." And Tom came back to the editorial offices and went, "We're boned. There's nothing we can do that's going to be as big as Spider-Man #1. Maybe if we do an X-Men #1 and we turn New Mutants into X-Force #1, this hot new team with this young creator Rob Liefeld. Maybe between the two of them, we'll be able to meet the sales of Spider-Man #1." And so they went ahead with this, and then X-Force #1 sold 5 million copies.
Rob, are you here by any chance? I think Rob was here somewhere earlier, but Rob is here at D23, and we can't thank him enough. X-Force, which eventually later went on to introduce Deadpool, was a huge success for us. Then, right after that, was Jim Lee and Chris Claremont launched X-Men.
And that sold 8.2 million copies.
I think this still remains the Guinness Book of World Records
it is the
best-selling English language comic.
It is the best-selling English language single issue. And so at the end of that year, Tom DeFalco went to the Marvel higher-ups for his publishing plan needs, and they said, "Good job, Tom. Now do it again, but more." And Tom came back and went, "Oh my God, what are we going to do now? Like, we lucked into this twice." And their answer ultimately was to do lines of books. And this is the origin of the 2099 line, which took the Marvel characters and reimagined them as they would be in the far-off future of 2099, which is now like about 6 hours from now.
And Carnage was another character.
Yeah, another unexpected success. As Venom became more popular as a villain, he was a villain, but he was kind of an anti-hero villain. He had kind of a good side to him. All he really wanted to do was kill Spider-Man, but besides that, he was all right. And as he became more popular and he headlined a book of his own, the decision was made, like, we kind of want to get back to a villainous version of a symbiote character, and so Venom's symbiote dropped a Spawn, and that Spawn became Carnage, the even worse version of Venom, and Carnage, too, became a wildly popular character and an antagonist for both Venom and Spidey.
Yeah, and this month we just launched Absolute Carnage, where the character still remains super popular. New series written by Donny Cates with Ryan Stegman. Yeah. And folks, we are running a little over here, but the kind folks at D23 Expo have given us a couple extra minutes. So if you don't mind staying, we got a couple more things, because Tom and I have been talking a little too much. But
we should shut up.
Try and fly through this stuff.
Who remembers this?
This was the gateway for so many people into Marvel. It's so fondly remembered. If Jordan White, our X-Men editor, was here, he plays the theme song on a ukulele for us in the office. But this really was where, Marvel started growing in the 90s, becoming the phenomenon it was, and expanding out from just, the comic book line, and again, getting more mainstream attention through what we were doing in the animation worlds. And now, we're an hour over.
We're an hour over?
No, we're a little bit over.
Holy smokes.
No. But one of the reasons we're here is to talk about Marvel Comics 1000. This is the way that the major book that we have chosen to take and celebrate our 80th anniversary. You will all be getting a special copy when you do leave today. For those that don't know, it's very close to the 10-year anniversary of when Marvel became part of the Disney family. And we've been very cautious through these last 10 years where to mix the characters. And Mickey has never appeared with the Marvel characters in any place before. But the kind folks at Disney and the people here at D23 Expo worked with us at Marvel to create a special collectible you can only get at this panel. A beautiful cover by Humberto Ramos that shows Mickey finally interacting with the Marvel heroes.
And the mainstream, the regular edition of the book comes out on Wednesday, so you're actually getting it a few days early. So please don't spoil it for everybody.
Brevoort demands no spoilers,
Spoilers.
on Marvel Comics 1000. So
Yeah.
Tom, why don't you tell us, this was your baby. Wonderful cover there by Alex Ross. Could you give us a quick rundown about what the fans here can find when they open the cover of Marvel Comics?
Yeah, very,
1000?
very simply, Marvel Comics 1000. It's an 80-plus page story book in which each page is a single story featuring some character throughout the Marvel universe, throughout Marvel history. Each page relates to one of the publishing years of Marvel. It tells a sweeping story that introduces a new Marvel hero that has ties back to the earliest days of Marvel, that kind of represents the whole of the Marvel Universe, and that has contributions, as it says here, from 80 different creative teams that span Marvel's history, past, present, future, and also folks that have never done work for Marvel before, but are so huge Marvel fans and who have a love for our characters and have established themselves in other fields that have contributed here for the first time.
Yeah, and I mean, this was a bear for you to put together, and I never knew how you were going to do it. And, you know, we talked about it during the creation of the book, and when I finally went through and read the whole thing, you know, it's just such a tribute and a triumph to celebrate the Marvel anniversary in this way. So if you could all help me give a big round of applause for Tom. There's just so many characters, past, present, and future, who are going to appear in here, you know, from, you know, I don't want to spoil too much from characters in the past, but if you're fans of America or Kamala Khan or Spider-Man or She-Hulk or the Black Knight, you know, everybody's going to show up in this book in some way, shape, or form at some point. And the one thing I would recommend is this comic you are going to want to read twice, because you're going to read it through and you're going to get the end, you're going to go, oh, I get it now, and then you're going to want to instantly go back to page 1 and read it all again, because it is such an enjoyable comic. So when you leave today, this is the cover that you will be getting.
So Marvel Comics 1000 was our big celebration of the history, of the past of Marvel and its 80 years of publishing. And at the end of this year, the last week in December in 2019, we're going to be doing our next big book, which is much more about the future and what is coming and what is about to strike the Marvel Universe. That book will be called Incoming. It will be another massive 96-page whopper that you can pick up over your Christmas, New Year holiday. All we're really saying or showing about it is this teaser image.
For those of you who saw that we presented a slate of different comic events over the year, this was the teaser that is December. We're giving away a little bit more here. So, you know, Tom had just wrapped Marvel Comics 1000. After a year of hard work, he said, whew, I'm putting that baby to bed. I said, Tom, I have an idea where you could do it all over again. He goes, oh, what, in 10 years for our 90th anniversary? And I said, nope, 10 weeks, last week of December. Get cooking. But this book really is something that so many of our current creators are working on, going to really set the course for what you're going to be seeing in the Marvel Universe in the years to come.
In 2020, yeah.
2020. So, I just want to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for being Marvel fans. Thank you for celebrating these 80 years with us. And please, get your comic on the way out and enjoy the rest of D23 Expo.